It's getting spicy, guys, because we were just thinking about how we're going to attack this video, talking about Phil Foden and if he's officially world class. We've got some other options in here when we're comparing him to other players. And we then started thinking about, is Phil Foden the best player in the Premier League? And we started talking about Bukayo Saka and Salah. Now, Kim has just said something outrageous.
Can I modify
Tell him the sentence.
Kim. Okay, fine.
Tell him the sentence that you just said, and then we'll have to come back to it because we need to talk about Phil Foden.
I do not think that Bukayo Saka is in the top 7 or 8 players in the Premier League.
There you go. Said it with his chest. Well done.
And I will name the players, and he will probably slip lower down that list as I name them.
he's digging and digging.
Okay. Pep Guardiola came out and said that Phil Foden is currently the best player in the league, and therefore Premier League's a big league, so we bumped that up to world class. Why is he doing that, first and foremost? Is Pep up to something? He's starting to talk again.
Yeah.
He did this with De Bruyne, did he not, last year?
He did. He does this every season for the last 7 or 8 seasons. Around this point, someone in his team becomes world class or becomes the best player. I think he said it with Cancelo in the first half of the season. I'm pretty sure he said it with Stones last season at a certain point. He said it about
He's at
Gundogan.
Barcelona as well.
Yeah, he said it about Gundogan. He said it about Mahrez. He said it about Sterling. This is just a Pep thing to do. I don't think we should say what Pep says is gospel. I think there's a conversation to be had.
I like that. Well done. Okay, right. Surely I'm going to say something wild here as well, because you two have both done it already. So with Phil Foden and his season, as a Man City fan, have you been sort of waiting for this season to occur, or have you been happy throughout? 27 appearances, 11 goals from the XG of 8.2. In terms of non-penalty goals, 11 goals as well, so none of those penalties. 7 assists, 57 key passes, 136 progressive passes, and 110 shot-creating actions. We'll get to Saka's stats a little bit later on. But Phil Foden, is he the best player in the league right now for you?
Yeah, I think he probably is the best player in the league at the moment. And I don't like to say at the moment because it just really changed week on week depending on who's injured, who's fit, who's performing. So at this current moment, I think his performance against Manchester United and the performances this season have justified him being given that tag. I think if Manchester City win the Premier League, I'm sure Phil Foden will win the PFA Player of the Year. And the thing for me was at the beginning of the season, all City fans adore Phil Foden. He's from Stockport. He's a Blue. He's won 5 Premier Leagues, 4 League Cups, 2 FA Cups, Champions League, whatever. He's got every single accolade in football and he's been absolutely exceptional. But the thing that we wanted a little bit more from him was consistency. There have been a few games over the last few years, the 2 goals that he scored against Dortmund and PSG in the Champions League. The first goal he scored in the Premier League was a header that gave us a 1-0 win against Spurs, which ended up being a pretty much the title decider. So he's come up with big moments, but he hasn't been that consistent, and that consistency has come this year. That was his only downfall, and he's rectified it. And the thing for me, which is why I will confidently say that he's world class, is the last 20 minutes of the United game. I mentioned it before, he's on the right-hand side, he dribbles past 2 players and creates a goal out of nothing. Then he gets switched for Bernardo Silva, goes on the left-hand side, plays a 1-2 with Alvarez, scores across the keeper to score the winner. Then City score their third, and there's 10 minutes, and you just don't want United to have any chance or any sniffs. And Pep has got De Bruyne from the middle, put him left wing, and put Phil in the middle of the park to control the tempo. And I could see him gesticulating to the players, lads, let's calm down. You know, he was telling players where to run and stuff. So he's become a leader. And the fact that Pep would trust him in that most important period of the game, in the most important position, when he's just scored 2 goals from the wings as well, says to me that he's versatile and world class.
The thing for me is that I think in previous seasons, when you talk about consistency, he's not actually been injured much, right? So the consistencies come from being chosen. You know, you had Mahrez and Gundogan and these other players that have, at Sterling at times have started in front of him. And when you think of all of these teams, or any great team, I think there is a guy. There's the guy. And I think the guy has been De Bruyne, of course, right? Now, De Bruyne was injured for a lot of this season. And Phil Foden has never been one of the main men of the team. So is that the big difference here? He really is one of the main men now for you?
I think, firstly, on the consistency thing, I think it's still up for debate, by the way, because you said right at this moment in time, if we're saying like the last 6 games, then you can't argue against certain Arsenal players. The first 13 games, Phil Foden had 6 goal contributions. Let's not forget there's been another whole half of the season.
And the other thing I would chuck to that, I think is a really good point, is that the Man United couldn't get out of their own half, could they?
Yeah.
So you got to put it in the top corner. It's amazing, and the second goal is again amazing. But that's a game where you're going to have more opportunities to create moments. Is that unfair?
The thing is though, what do you want from Foden? I think when you say consistency, you mean goals and assists, right? Like he needs to add more of that to his game at the start of the season.
More so being involved in big moments and big plays and being an integral part of the team.
Okay.
Because I think there are players, particularly in the Premier League, maybe not so many from Man City, who, I take it back actually a few years when we had Gabriel Jesus. His stats were absolutely phenomenal, but he would score when we were 3-0 up against Brentford or Brighton or those kind of teams who weren't doing so well in the league at the moment. And what I wanted from Foden was for him to, as you say, be the guy. You want people to be tweeting about him saying he's him after the games. And they are at the moment. And he's justified that with his performances. And I think, you mention it about not maybe playing so much over the last couple of years. And that's a completely valid argument. But he's had to compete since he's come to City, since he was 17, with David Silva, Gundogan, De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva. These are elite world-class footballers, and he was a youngster, and now he's stepping into those shoes, as you say, because De Bruyne got injured. He stepped into those shoes, and he hasn't looked a jot out of place.
And this is what we want. I think with Phil Foden, the thing for me, so I did a video on my channel and got a lot of heat for it. It was about Bukayo Saka and Foden. And the point that I wanted to make is that, again, and we've been trying to do this, we always try to do this, provide that context around what we're talking about, because, people watching this aren't stupid. Like, they can understand nuance. And I think that in the video that I did then, if you look at all the stats, Saka is better. If you're going on stats alone, right? But with Arsenal, all roads kind of go through Bukayo Saka, right, in terms of that creation. But he still does create all that stuff. And Phil Foden plays in far more central areas at a much kind of slower pace because the opposition. I know Arsenal do dominate the ball overall, but there are other players. He's still a big cog, but he's still always part of a machine there. But he's miles better. He's so good in those central areas with those action man hips that he's got. But Saka's better at other things than Phil Foden. So it's one where, eye test wise, Phil Foden's so fun to watch that people are getting a bit angry because it's like you can't say that Saka's getting destroyed as a player, which we can get to your 10 in a sec, because we've chucked him with Phil Foden, and I find it a little bit odd because I'd rather have, for England, I'd rather have Saka on the right. If you're asking me to play out of those two, I'd rather have Saka. If you've got to play someone through the middle, I'd rather have Foden.
We've been there before. Aesthetics has become... It's so desirable because there's a lack of aesthetics. And so, like, anyone who's got an aesthetic... And I think Foden is delightful to watch. Action man hips, never heard it. I love it. I'm going to use it all the time. But there's a man on this list that we haven't mentioned, and I don't think he's been better than the other two this season. But consistency-wise, he still has 11 non-penalty goals, 9 assists. He's played 6 less games than Foden. It's Mo Salah. And typically we've often gone, he's not the guy, because all he does is put the ball in the back of the net, which is still the hardest thing to do in football. And now we're doing the same to Saka, which I think is completely unfair.
Yeah.
We're going, Saka, all he does is score goals and get assists. A year ago we were saying he doesn't score enough goals and get assists. So
I think out of this, because the thing is, out of these three, who am I enjoying the most to watch? Phil Foden. And if I'm going, who am I giving the player of the year today? I give it to Phil Foden, because other players who've had little purple patches along the way, Trent, Maddison, have both been injured at different times. So I don't think you can allow them to have it. And even De Bruyne is on an unbelievable amount of assists already, but you just expect it. Mo Salah, he's obviously scoring 15 goals. He's so crucial to them. But again, he's kind of been out a little bit. And Saka has been available generally for all of it. He's the most important player, I think, in the Premier League. Bukayo Saka. I think he's the most important. I do. Because you take him out, he is utterly irreplaceable. Utterly irreplaceable. Alongside Mohamed Salah.
Is that an Arsenal thing? Because they don't have anyone else? Or are you saying, regardless of whether they had someone else, he still is the most important? Because the reason you wouldn't say Salah is because they have other options, no?
I would say, I think Salah's right there next to him, but I think they have more options, which we spoke about in a previous video, in able to change the game, more attacking different assets. When you think Arsenal, you think Saka and Martinelli. And if you lose one of those, especially on that right-hand side, on the left-hand side, you could bring in Trossard, or you can make slight differences there. Saka is so important from that point of view, and I think he's getting a little bit disrespected just because he's not as sexy as Phil Foden.
Do you think that if Arsenal win the league, Sacka would be Player of the Year over Odegaard and Declan Rice, though?
That's a great question. I think we spoke about it in the last video. There's a real tough run of games for Arsenal to go and win it, right? If they are to go and win it, Sacka will probably be Player of the Year because he's going to have to... That attacking burden will come back to him. I think it will when those games are getting a little bit tense. And another thing that we've spoken about over the seasons, cheat codes. Like, who are your different cheat codes? Phil Foden against Man United at the weekend was a cheat code in terms of getting the ball and putting it in that top corner. Bukayo Saka. But if you don't have Phil Foden, you've got De Bruyne, you've got Haaland, you've got these other options. I don't think Arsenal have the same amount of options.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that Saka is a better player. It just means that he's a different player for a different team.
I get that, but I still think he is providing output. So I think he's a really good player.
I think I agree that, like,
get your 10 ready. Here we go.
There's come a point where people have just been desensitized to guys that score goals and get assists, and Saka has done that very consistently throughout the season. Foden in the last 10 to 12 games has been outstanding. Yeah. I still think the player of the season, if City win the league, is Rodri. Why are we sleeping on him? It doesn't work without him. Yeah. It works without Foden. And in the same way, I just looked at Saka's stats here. When he's not contributed this season against Villa, Liverpool, West Ham, they've lost those games and or drawn. And so that speaks to how important he is. I want to hear this 10 though.
Give us a 10.
Seven or eight. 7 or 8. I said. 7 or 8. No, to be honest, I think, and this is just a thing with football, and it kind of disagrees with what you're saying. I think there's always been a massive bias towards attackers and towards the players who get the goals.
Of course.
As you say, pretty much everything that Arsenal do will go through Saka mainly, and then Martinelli. So he's naturally in a team who's got much more possession and creating many more chances. He himself will have more chances than lots of other players. I think if we're talking world-class footballers, I think at their prime, or maybe even now, you would rather have, in most teams, you'd rather have a Van Dijk than a Saka. You'd rather have a Salah. You'd rather have a De Bruyne. You'd rather have a Rodri. I said 5 or 6. No, I said 6.
You said
7 or 8. I said 7 or 8. I must have counted wrong. But yeah, I would say, you'd probably even rather have an Alisson.
Okay, let me ask you, is Saka the most important player for Arsenal?
No. He's not. I don't even think he's the second most important player. I think Declan Rice right now is the most important player. Okay. I think Odegaard is the second most important player.
I'd actually say Saliba.
or Saliba, and then Saka.
Right, we're going to be here forever.
If we can name all these players, it kind of speaks to the point that I don't think he can be in line to be the best player in the league. I absolutely love the guy. I love him for England. I love watching him play. And I don't want to disrespect him, but I don't think that a guy who is playing as he is playing can be rated higher than someone like Phil Foden, who's doing it with versatility.
That's a good point. Should we leave it to the comments? Give us your 10, and where does Saka rate in that 10? To the 10, what are we saying? 10 best players in the Premier League. Let us know.